Warning: this episode includes graphic details about cannibalism. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Murder Road Trip. I'm your host, Haley. Joining me on today's road trip is the host of the Asian Madness podcast, Jessica. Jessica, can you tell us about the Asian Madness podcast?
Yes, of course. I host a podcast that discusses all things weird, creepy, and murdery from the Asian continent. So if you're into that sort of stuff and want to hear more about how Asians are equally crazy, you can try my podcast.
I love the Asian Madness podcast because you cover cases that no one else covers.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
And some of these crimes that you cover are insane, like unbelievable.
Some of them I've never even heard of, and when I research them, I'm like, wow, what is this thing?
Where can listeners find you?
Anywhere you listen to podcasts, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the usual.
Awesome. You're pretty active on social media, which is great.
Yeah, I will respond to any messages, so if anybody wants to send me anything, except nudes, I will respond. Well, I might respond.
I'll keep that in mind.
All right.
We will be snacking on two Japanese classics, Pocky and green tea Kit Kats, as we make our way from Kobe, Japan to Paris, France, to discuss Japanese cannibal Issei Sagawa. Jessica, what made you pick Issei Sagawa for today's trip?
Okay, so first of all, as I'm Asian, it is only appropriate I pick somebody that's Asian. He's fascinating in a weird way, and this entire case and the entire outcome is just bizarre and full of what the fucks. So I know that other podcasts have talked about him before, but honestly, it doesn't really get old, and a lot of people still have never heard of him.
Yeah, like I was saying before, I've never heard of him, even though there's been some documentaries and stuff. And I remember you sending it to me, and you're like, is this too gruesome? No, let's talk about this because this is insane. I just want to say this before we even get started. You can watch video of him talking about what we're going to discuss today. And he just talks about it as if it's no big deal.
Yeah, he's just talking about that, hamburger he had at McDonald's or something. It's just, typical day. Nothing major.
Yeah, it's so weird. So thanks again for picking this topic and coming on.
Oh, no, thank you for having me.
Are you ready to go?
Yep.
We lost the station again.
Keep trying.
Hold on. Let me try this one.
Stop. That's it. Turn it up. Turn it up.
Issei Sagawa was born in Kobe City in the Hyogo Prefecture on April 26, 1949. He came from a rather wealthy family. His father owned several construction companies and was a very well-respected individual. His family was considered loving and supportive, but at the same time very conservative and strict. It's not surprising if they're a very traditional Japanese family. Although Issei did not have to worry about having a good life, he did have other limitations. So Issei was born a few months prematurely. His mother reportedly fell down a flight of stairs when she was pregnant with him, which caused his premature birth. I believe he would always feel some hatred for her for this incident. Not like it was on purpose, obviously, and I do feel bad for the mother. But because of his premature birth, he went through some health complications, but eventually recovered from them. What bothered him the most in the end was his appearance. He felt shame over his appearance, his facial features, and his body size. As a full-grown adult, Issei was 5 feet tall, approximately 152 centimeters, and weighed only 48.5 kilograms, which would be about 105 pounds. It was said his voice was also very high-pitched, but after watching his interviews, I thought it sounded rather normal. I wouldn't confuse his voice for a woman's voice. Issa also had a younger brother, and they were said to have been very close. They would play games as children together, where his father and uncle would pretend to be giants and would chase the two children around, pretending to eat them.
According to a Vice interview, Issei's first cannibalistic thought occurred in first grade when he noticed a fellow male classmate's thigh. Upon noticing the thigh, Issei thought, that looks delicious, to himself. It appears that Issei's cannibalistic thoughts subsided until he entered middle school and became infatuated with Western actresses. The infatuation lasted through high school. Issei believes his obsession with Western women stemmed from his own insecurities. He is short, 5 feet, which Jessica said before, ugly, and far from healthy. Those are his words, not mine. Issei is attracted to women who are his exact opposite, tall, beautiful, and healthy. Issei's cannibalistic thoughts were and continue to be limited to strong desires to simply bite into women. He does not want to murder women, he just wants to take a bite out of them. Issei says his cannibalistic thoughts do not come from hunger, they are simply sexual desires or a fetish. In order to deal with his sexual desires, Issei masturbates quite often. If he is unable to masturbate enough, his hunger only grows stronger. In 1972, for the first time, Issei acted on his sexual desires. He attacked a German woman who was living in his grandmother's old apartment building in Tokyo, Japan. Issei snuck into the woman's apartment and found her sleeping naked in bed. As he stood over her, contemplating his plan to knock her out, Issei accidentally touched the woman and she woke up. The woman screamed and called police. Later, the police charged Issei with attempted rape. It is alleged that Issei's wealthy father paid the woman to drop the charges.
In 1977, after Issei received his first master's degree from Kwansei Gakuin University, a very prestigious and expensive university, he moved to Paris, France, in pursuit of a PhD in literature at Sorbonne. Before leaving Japan, Issei noted that while he was extremely excited, his mother showed concern, but not the kind where a parent worries about their child's well-being. It felt more like she knew something might go wrong. Maybe a mother always knows. Kind of like a mother's instinct. When he was in Paris, he would bring home a prostitute every night. He said he always thought about shooting them, but he was never able to go through with it. As Haley mentioned earlier, he was obsessed with Western women as they seemed to have everything he did not. It's likely that he never felt the connection with these prostitutes, so he never could bring himself to kill them.
In 1981, Issei noticed a woman named Renee Hartevelt in one of his classes. Renee was a 25-year-old Dutch woman who was pursuing a PhD in French literature at the university. Renee was an incredibly intelligent woman who spoke 3 languages, German, French, and English. One day after class, Issei talked to Renee, and the two became friends. They went to dinner and coffee a few times, and Issei fell for her. He said Renee was friendly and warm. She was different from any woman he had ever met. She was also his complete opposite, tall, beautiful, and healthy. In order to get closer to her, Issei asked Renee if she would tutor him in German. Renee took Issei up on the idea and started going to his residence to give lessons.
On June 11, 1981, Issei invites Renee over to his house again under the pretense of studying and translating some schoolwork. Of course, she doesn't think anything could go wrong, so she goes. As Haley explained, she was his exact opposite, and he wanted to be that. While there, Issei worked up the courage and asked her to have sex with him. She politely rejects him and told him that they're just friends. He says he understands and then asks her if she could recite a poem for him while he records it. She was probably happy to move on from that topic, so she agrees. While she sits at the desk with her back turned towards him, he picks up a rifle and shoots her in the neck. Some reports say that he passed out from the initial shock of pulling the trigger. And once he came to, he got himself a butcher's knife and began working on her. He worked on a few parts of her body, like her buttocks and her breasts, her thighs, and her nose. When he found it too hard to cut into, he would use his hands to gouge some of the flesh out of her. He was surprised that the fat stored in humans resembled corn, as in it was small, circular, and yellow. He feasted on her flesh, and he described it later on as very tasty and smooth, kind of like sashimi. I think he just ruined sashimi for everybody.
I was just going to say that I'm never going to be able to eat that again.
Afterwards, he took photos of her body and her body parts. Then he had sex with the corpse, or what was left of it. He stored the flesh and the parts he cut off in the freezer, then carried Renee's torso into bed with him for a good night's rest. He continues eating what's left of her the following day, except instead of eating it raw, he starts cooking and frying the parts, possibly experimenting. He also dipped it in wasabi, going all Japanese on it. He eventually cut off her tongue and ate it, all the while imagining himself French kissing her. And he ruined French kissing for everybody as well. He also cuts off one of her arms and her lips, used them to masturbate, and once he was done, he stored the arm and her lips in the freezer, possibly for future use. Issei spent 2 days indulging in his fantasy, probably a dream come true for him, but he knew he had to do something soon because the body parts were starting to smell and decompose. He came up with a pretty bad plan, but I guess that's all he could come up with at the time. He bought 2 suitcases and stuffed her remains in them. He called a cab and asked the driver to take him to a park with a lake. When he got to the lakeside, he attempted to drag the 2 suitcases into the lake, but he was spotted by 2 people, possibly joggers. Once he realized he was seen, he low-key panics and quickly dumps the 2 suitcases and leaves. Of course, it was very sketchy, so the police were called. They arrived and discovered Renee's remains inside the 2 suitcases. In the meantime, Issei returns to his apartment, probably thinking this will all be over soon, and continues his human flesh feast. It didn't take very long to find and arrest him. He was arrested the following day.
That has to be the worst plan I've ever heard of.
I know it sounds, well, it's very amateur, but he is one.
I'm honestly glad because then they caught him.
I know.
And the family at least got to know what happened to their daughter, which maybe is not the best.
I know. I was like, do you really want to hear all this?
I know.
Ugh.
Yeah. After his arrest, Issei was interviewed by 3 psychiatrists, as you would expect. When the psychiatrist determined that Issei was legally insane, he was transferred from jail to a psychiatric hospital where he remained until his deportation in 1984. There are multiple stories that detail why Issei was deported back to Japan. One story alleges that the French public was outraged at having to house a Japanese criminal at their own expense. The other story alleges that Issei's father hired a defense lawyer who persuaded the authorities to deport Issei back to Japan. Either way, Issei was deported back to Japan in 1984. He was immediately sent to Matsuzawa Psychiatric Hospital, where he was examined by more psychiatrists. The new psychiatrists did not find Issei to be legally insane. They found him to have a sexual perversion and a personality disorder. The Japanese authorities contacted the French authorities and requested information that could help them charge Issei with the murder of Renee. However, the French police opted to not collaborate with the Japanese police. The French authorities said the case was closed and they never sent any documents to Japan. Because the Japanese authorities had no case, they had no other choice but to let Issei walk as a free man. On the 12th of August, 1986, Issei checked himself out of the Matsuzawa Psychiatric Hospital and went to live with his parents.
Isn't it crazy how he was able to just walk out? If you think you would be ostracized or hated by the public, you would be 100% wrong. He became a celebrity. He became a speaker at several events, such as university courses, academic seminars, and so on. He was invited to share his thoughts on cannibalism and to speak about his crimes. People were fascinated. I understand being fascinated, but this is a little bit too much. He also became a bit of a celebrity and commentator for various shows. He made appearances in political shows, cooking shows, and he wrote restaurant reviews. That is so weird. As if being a cannibal meant he knew what good food was. He was even brought in to work with law enforcement on a case in 1989, commenting and sharing his insights on serial killer Tsutomu Miyazaki, also known as the Otaku murderer. He also took up a bit of acting, but nothing very mainstream. He appeared in a few semi-pornographic films, and the most famous one was called Unfaithful Wife, Shameful Torture, or also called The Bedroom. This film was about female clientels drugged into a trance-like state and were used as sex toys by the male clients. Mostly a film about fetishes. All these film exploitations were only sensationalizing his crimes, almost to the point of mocking the crime that actually took place. This is so weird and just really, really sad. Oh, but wait, one more thing. He also wrote about 20 books. Most of his books were about his crimes and his cannibalistic fantasies. The most famous one that talks about his crimes is the book Kiri no Naka, and in English it means In the Fog. He also wrote a book about the Kobe child murders. If it weren't for his despicable crime, I would almost say he was talented and artistic. But all this fame has to come to an end at some point. In recent years, he struggles to find work, and his crimes and the initial shock of it has since died down. People no longer want to publish his work, and when he tried to find work at a French language school, he was rejected. Shocking, I know. Both his parents have since passed away, and his comment about his current life goes something like, being forced to make a living while being a murderer and a cannibal sucks. Wow, you don't say. According to him, he is no longer interested in Western women, but is now instead interested in young Japanese women. And his favorite public figure would be a woman named Ueto Aya. She's a singer and an actress, and I think she's pretty cute.
So, you'd think that the shocking part of this story is that he ate a woman, but the shocking part of the story is that he became a celebrity.
That is the most bizarre twist ending to a murder ever.
I watched the documentary where he goes on and talks about the new woman he's obsessed with, and
Oh.
he has a poster of her behind him when he's talking. You're just like, oh my gosh. I don't.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to know how it feels to be her knowing that she's his new fantasy. Ugh.
And he goes into details about the pornographic films he made and things. And I was like, that's the last person I want to see in a pornographic film is a cannibal.
And a cannibal that, he does think he's ugly, so I don't really understand.
Yeah. I think it's crazy that he became a celebrity and was let out of jail.
Not even jail. He checked himself out. And it's like, oh, well, I think I'm done here. Bye.
No, sir, you are not done here.
You're far from done.
You need help.
I know. And the whole sensationalizing and the cooking shows, ugh,
Yeah.
it's so gross.
I felt like the majority of the documentary I watched was just him explaining how poor he is and how he can't find a job.
Yeah.
Which, for a second, I felt bad for him. And then I realized that he ate a woman. And then I was like, you should be in jail where you're not worrying about these things.
That is very true, actually. If you were in jail, he would have a roof over his head and food every single day.
And the help that he needs. Oh my gosh.
Oh, please.
Well, what a case.
Yeah, that's what I see from Asian cultures, at least. People don't think about mental health as much, so even if he did I mean, he probably does, but, knowing that he has problems, people are less likely to look into it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Do you know if there are any cases where a person has been found legally insane in Japan? Because it's really interesting that France found him legally insane.
not off the top of my head, but I think there could be, but right now I can't think of any.
But that just shows how it doesn't happen very often.
No, it's not even just Japan. It's all these other Asian places. I mean, people don't really think about mental illness or mental health problems or if they have any disorders. It's like, oh, you killed, like, I don't know, like 50 people. Oh, you must be, just a murderous asshole and you should die. That's basically it. Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah,
Because it's not always that.
it's not.
I mean, sometimes they are just a murderous asshole, but sometimes there's something else going on.
Yeah, there's usually like something else happening behind the scenes, but people choose not to look at it.
I would have thought that Asian culture was more proactive in mental health because I always look at Asian cultures as being more advanced than America.
Culture-wise, I think it really has to do with what kind of culture, but like, for example, accepting anyone that's not heterosexual.
Oh, no.
I think this is still at its infancy. But then again, Taiwan, where I'm from, I think it's been legalized, same-sex marriage. But aside from Taiwan, I really don't see it ever happening in the near future for other countries. And so a lot of things are still not accepted here.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
Please make sure to check out the Asian Madness podcast, and you can learn more about Asian true crime. Before we go, I just wanted to let everyone know that Esther from Once Upon a Crime just covered Issei Sagawa, so please make sure to check out her episode as well. Until next time, please remember to check your back seats, and I'll see you at the next rest stop. If you didn't know already, you can also listen to me on the We're All Just Pretending podcast, where I give bad advice on purpose. You can also find Jess and me on the Playlist podcast. Playlist is a podcast where Josh Hallmark of Our Americana and the Karen and Ellen Letters has different podcasters on to talk about their favorite songs. Every episode has a different theme and a new panel of podcasters. You can find Murder Road Trip at murderroadtrip.com, on Instagram and Twitter at Murder Trip, and on Facebook at Murder Road Trip Podcast. If you're interested in continuing the discussion, you can join the Murder Road Trip Podcast group on Facebook. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe on your podcast app of choice. Please stay tuned after the music to hear from some other great podcasts.
There's a good chance that you are interested in true crime and all things creepy and weird. If I'm right, then there's also a good chance you might find my podcast, the Asian Madness Podcast, interesting. You can find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and pretty much everywhere else. It's true crime, it's dark, it's morbid, and it's weird. Come explore the dark side of Asia with me. Because let's face it, Asia is just as crazy as the rest of the world.
Are you a fan of true crime? Are you looking for a different perspective on certain cases? Are you looking for queer representation and/or people of color representation in your true crime coverage? Criminal Musings is a true crime podcast hosted by yours truly, me, JV, a queer black human with a degree in psychology and a passion for exploring the factors and circumstances that led to various crimes being committed. I cover crimes involving queer people and people of color, which means you may be hearing about some new and fascinating cases that you didn't know about before. And I always provide references and shoutouts to other shows who covered these cases as well. Tune in and stay safe out there. You can find Criminal Musings on Apple Podcasts, at Blazing Caribou Studios, and wherever else you get your podcasts.
very memorable, shocking, and bizarre crime that happened.
Seems almost too bizarre to be true.
Charged in a bizarre,
accused of dressing up as a clown.
The bizarre twist in this story.
Got the break they needed in this bizarre case.
The damage that this man has caused so far.
We've never seen anything like this.
Welcome to Beyond Bizarre True Crime. These are the stories that'll make you wonder if they came from Hollywood or if Hollywood took it from them. Available on your favorite podcast app or online at Beyond Bizarre True Crime.